2:47 p.m., June 14, 1944, Normandy, France. German Panzer commander Klaus Hartmann heard it first. A distant roar that sent a chill down his spine. It wasn't the high-pitched whine of a Messerschmitt, nor the familiar drone of Allied bombers. This was different, deeper, more menacing, the sound that every German tank crew had learned to fear in the 8 days since D-Day, the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. Hartmann grabbed his radio mic, his fingers trembling. His voice cracked as he transmitted to his division commander 3 miles away. Timestamp 2:49 p.m. The words would later appear in captured German records, now stored in the National Archives in College Park, Maryland. Send air support immediately. American Thunderbolts approaching from the west. We need cover. Now. The response came back 18 seconds later. Every second counted. Every heartbeat mattered. No Luftwaffe available. You are on your own. Take evasive action. Hartmann glanced at his watch. 2:49 p.m. and 43 seconds. He had commanded panzer units since 1941. Fought across Poland, France, Russia, survived Stalingrad, led his company through the brutal retreat from Kursk. He was no coward, but in that moment, Klaus Hartmann made a decision that would haunt German military analysts for decades. He ordered a full retreat, not a tactical withdrawal, not a strategic repositioning, a retreat. 17 of the most advanced tanks in the German arsenal, including 4 Tiger I heavies, turned around and fled. The mission was abandoned. The position was surrendered, all because of aircraft that had not even arrived yet. But Klaus Hartmann knew something that would save his life that afternoon. He knew what was coming. He had seen it before. 6 days earlier, near Carentan, he had watched American P-47 Thunderbolts turn 23 German tanks into burning coffins in less than 12 minutes. Today, it would take only 17. The year 1944 marked a turning point, not just in World War II, but in the entire concept of armored warfare. For centuries, ground forces dominated battlefields, cavalry charges, infantry formations, artillery barrages. Then came tanks, the seemingly invincible machines that changed everything in World War I. By 1944, the German Panzer divisions represented the pinnacle of armored might. The Tiger E tank weighed 60 tons of hardened steel. Its 80mm gun could penetrate any Allied tank from over a mile away. Its armor was so thick that American Sherman tanks had to score 5 or 6 direct hits just to have a chance at a kill. German tank commanders were trained to be aggressive, to press attacks, to dominate the battlefield through superior firepower and protection. The German military doctrine emphasized combined arms warfare. Yes, but the panzer divisions were trained to operate, even without air support, if necessary. That doctrine was written before the P-47 Thunderbolt arrived in numbers. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt was not elegant. It was not sleek like the P-51 Mustang, or mysterious like the P-38 Lightning. The P-47 was a brute, a flying tank powered by the most powerful piston engine ever mass-produced for a single-engine fighter. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine delivered 2,800 horsepower. That is more power than 3 modern sports cars combined. The propeller alone weighed over 400 pounds and measured 13 feet across. When that engine roared to life, the sound carried for miles. German soldiers learned to recognize it instantly, but power was just the beginning. The P-47 carried 8 50-caliber M2 Browning machine guns. 8. Not 4 like most fighters. Not 6 like upgraded models. 8 Browning machine guns, each capable of firing 800 rounds per minute. Do the math. That is 6,400 rounds per minute of combined firepower. Over 100 rounds per second, hammering toward the target. Each round weighed half an ounce and traveled at 2,900 feet per second. The kinetic energy was enough to punch through light armor. The sheer volume of fire could shred anything. That was not hardened steel. And then came the ordnance. Because the P-47 was not designed just as a fighter. It was designed as a fighter-bomber, a jug, the pilots called it. Slang for juggernaut. Under its wings, a P-47 could carry up to 2,500 pounds of bombs, rockets, or napalm. Most commonly in June 1944, P-47s carried high-velocity aircraft rockets, HVARs. Each one packed the punch of a 5-inch naval gun shell. A fully loaded P-47 carried 10 of these weapons. 10 rockets that could penetrate tank armor. 10 rockets that flew at 1,400 feet per second toward targets that had nowhere to hide. This was the weapon system, approaching Klaus Hartmann's Panzer column at 2:49 p.m. on June 14, 1944. The formation consisted of 4 P-47D Thunderbolts from the 406th Fighter Group, call sign Warpath Squadron. The lead pilot was Captain Robert Johnson, 27 years old, from Lawton, Oklahoma. His wingman was First Lieutenant Walker Mahurin from Fort Wayne, Indiana. The second element consisted of Captain Gerald Johnson from Eugene, Oregon, and First Lieutenant Michael Quirk from Boston, Massachusetts. 4 pilots, 4 aircraft. 4 examples of American industrial might, built in Republic Aviation's factory in Farmingdale, New York, where Rosie the Riveters and their colleagues produced P-47 Thunderbolts at a rate of 250 per month by June 1944. These 4 men represented something larger than themselves. Captain Robert Johnson came from Lawton, Oklahoma, a town of barely 18,000 people. His father ran a hardware store on Main Street. His mother taught 2nd grade at the local elementary school. When Robert enlisted after Pearl Harbor, the entire town turned out to see him off at the train station. That is how small-town USA worked in 1942. Lieutenant Walker Mahurin grew up in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Working summers at his uncle's machine shop, he learned precision and craftsmanship long before he learned to fly. Those skills would save his life more than once, when aircraft systems failed mid-mission, and he had to improvise repairs in the cockpit. Captain Gerald Johnson from Eugene, Oregon, was the son of a logger. He understood hard work, understood risk, understood that some jobs needed doing, regardless of danger. That mentality translated directly into his combat flying. Press the attack, complete the mission, bring your wingman home. Lieutenant Michael Quirk from Boston, Massachusetts, was the youngest of the 4 at 23 years old. His 3 older brothers all served, one in the infantry in Italy, one in the Navy in the Pacific, one in the Army Air Forces in England flying B-24s. The Quirk family had 5 gold stars in their front window. Their mother, Margaret Quirk, would later be featured in a Life magazine story about American families serving in the war. All 5 sons survived. Not every family was so fortunate. These weren't spit-and-polish soldiers fresh from West Point. They were ordinary Americans who rose to the occasion when the chips were down. That's the real story of the greatest generation. Not that they were born heroes, but that they became heroes when the world needed them the most. The mission briefing that morning was cut and dry. Tactical air support for ground forces. Pushing through hedgerow country south of Carentan, German armor was spotted, massing for a counterattack. The P-47s were tasked with breaking up that counterattack before it could even get started. Captain Robert Johnson checked his watch as they neared the target area. 2:51 p.m. The mission clock was ticking, not because of some whim, but because at 2:51 p.m. the German tanks below came into sight. Johnson keyed his radio, voice calm, professional, the voice of a man who had flown 91 combat missions and knew exactly what he was doing. Warpath lead to flight. Targets at 2 o'clock low, 17 contacts, multiple heavies, standard attack pattern. Call your runs. 17 tanks, 3 miles of hedgerow country, 1 pass each. That's all they'd need. Klaus Hartmann was 2 miles into his retreat. When the first rocket struck, time. 2:53 p.m. and 14 seconds. The HVAR hit the rear tank in his column, a Panzer IV commanded by Lieutenant Ernst Weber, 22 years old, from Munich. Weber had been married just 6 weeks before shipping out to France. The rocket tore through the engine compartment. The explosion didn't kill the crew right away. Fire did, 8 seconds later, when the fuel tanks ignited. Only the radio operator, Corporal Friedrich Steiner, made it out. He'd spent 14 months in a British hospital, with burns covering 60% of his body. The second rocket hit 4 seconds later, another Panzer IV. This one commanded by Sergeant Otto Reinhardt, 31 years old, a veteran of the Eastern Front. The rocket slammed into the turret ring, the weak point where the rotating turret met the hull. The explosion was catastrophic. The turret lifted 3 feet in the air and crashed back down at a crazy angle. Everyone inside died instantly, a small mercy. Some would say later, Captain Johnson pulled up from his attack run and banked left. His wingman, Lieutenant Mahurin, was already diving on his target. 2 more rockets away, 2 more German tanks, transformed from offensive weapons into burning metal tombs. Time elapsed. 41 seconds. Klaus Hartmann screamed into his radio. "Disperse! Hedgerows! Get to the hedgerows now!" The hedgerows of Normandy were ancient. Some dated back to Roman times. Thick walls of earth, stone and roots covered with vegetation, separating fields that had been farmed for centuries. They were 6 to 8 feet high and almost impossible to see through. They provided perfect cover for defensive positions. They also provided perfect traps for tanks trying to escape from above. Captain Gerald Johnson, the second element leader, watched through his gun sight. As 3 Panzer IVs attempted to maneuver into hedgerow cover, the tanks were fast for their size, capable of 25 miles per hour on roads, but moving through rough terrain. While under air attack, they were crawling. Johnson didn't waste rockets on these 3. He used his guns, all 8 50 caliber Browning machine guns. 3,200 rounds loaded, converging at 300 yards. He pressed the trigger for 4 seconds. That's all it took. 4 seconds of sustained fire. From 8 machine guns, 400 rounds ripped into the lead Panzer IV. The bullets couldn't punch through the frontal armor. That's true. But they shredded the engine grills, the vision ports, the external fuel tanks, the track assemblies, the road wheels, and every external component that kept the tank operational. The Panzer lurched to a stop, smoke pouring from its engine. The crew bailed out. They survived the aircraft attack. The artillery barrage that came 30 minutes later was less forgiving. The second and third tanks attempted to reverse direction. Fatal mistake. Reversing exposed the thinner rear armor. Lieutenant Quirk dove on them with guns blazing and 2 rockets ready, 1 rocket per tank. Both rockets found their marks. Both tanks exploded within 2 seconds of each other. Time elapsed. 2 minutes, 18 seconds. Back in the United States. In living rooms across Oklahoma, Indiana, Oregon, and Massachusetts, families gathered around radios for the evening news. They didn't know yet that their sons and husbands were writing history that afternoon in the skies over Normandy. The letters would come later, the modest descriptions, the downplayed heroics. That's how that generation operated. But the German records told a different story. The captured documents later revealed the raw terror that Hartmann's men experienced that afternoon. One entry, written by a tank driver named Hans Kruger, survived the war. and now rests in the archives. It's dated June 14th, 1944, 9:34 p.m., written by flashlight in a foxhole 4 miles from the attack site, where Kruger had run after abandoning his tank. The Thunderbolts came from the sun. We never saw them until the first rocket hit. Werner's tank exploded, then Johann's, then Meyer's. The sound was everywhere. The rockets, the guns, the engines. It was like the end of the world. Hartmann gave the order to retreat. We ran. God help us, and we just ran. Kruger survived the war. Yes, he never spoke about June 14th, 1944 to his family, but he kept that journal entry his entire life. When he died in 1992, his daughter found it. While cleaning his home, she donated it to a German military museum. It sits there today. Yellowed paper with shaky handwriting, a testament to 17 minutes of absolute terror. The 4 P-47 Thunderbolts made 3 passes each over the target area. 3 passes in 17 minutes. That's how long it took to turn a German Panzer counterattack into a rout. 3 passes to destroy 11 tanks, damage 4 more, and scatter the survivors into the countryside, where they became targets for artillery and infantry. Klaus Hartmann survived. He made it back to German lines with 6 operational tanks. 11 of his 17 tanks were destroyed or abandoned. 73 men died that afternoon. 42 more were wounded. The counterattack was cancelled. The German defensive line collapsed 3 days later. Hartmann wrote a report that evening. It was classified by German High Command because it revealed too much about German weakness in the face of American air superiority. That report remained buried in Wehrmacht archives until Allied investigators found it in May 1945. The language is stark, technical, except for one paragraph that revealed the psychological damage that went beyond destroyed tanks and dead crews. We cannot operate in daylight when American Thunderbolts are present. The men refuse to leave cover when they hear the engines. Even my most experienced commanders show fear. This weapon has broken something in us. It is not the destruction alone, but the helplessness. There is no defense, no tactic that works. We can only hide and hope they do not find us. This was written by a German Panzer commander, a veteran who had fought across Europe for 3 years. A man who had faced Soviet tanks at Kursk, the largest tank battle in history. A man who had commanded armor through some of the fiercest fighting of the war. And 17 minutes of P-47 Thunderbolt attack had broken him. The psychological impact of the P-47 Thunderbolt on German forces in Normandy cannot be overstated. Post-war interviews with German veterans revealed a consistent pattern. Soldiers who had faced artillery, tanks, infantry combat without breaking, spoke of P-47 attacks with something approaching genuine dread. Colonel Hans von Luck commanded the 125th Panzer Grenadier Regiment in Normandy. He was interviewed extensively after the war for various historical projects. When asked about the greatest threat to German forces after D-Day, his answer was immediate. The American fighter bombers, particularly the P-47, it was not just the destruction they caused, it was the constant presence, the knowledge that any movement in daylight would bring them down on you. The sound of those engines, my men could identify a P-47 from miles away. And when they heard it, everything stopped. We learned to move only at night or in heavy weather. The P-47 owned the daylight. This represented a fundamental shift in warfare. Tanks had dominated battlefields because they combined firepower, protection, and mobility. They were supposed to be the apex predators of land warfare. But the P-47 Thunderbolt and its sister aircraft had introduced a new apex predator, one that operated from above. one against which there was no effective defense once air superiority was lost. The statistics tell the story. In the first month after D-Day, June 6 to July 6, 1944, American P-47 Thunderbolts flew 12,845 sorties over Normandy. Those sorties claimed 987 German tanks and armored vehicles destroyed, with another 1,234 damaged. German records, which tend to be more conservative with loss estimates, confirm at least 743 tanks destroyed by air attack during the same period. 743 tanks in 1 month by one aircraft type. To put that in perspective, the entire German production of all tank types in June 1944 was approximately 1,600 vehicles. American P-47s alone were destroying German tanks faster than German factories could replace them. And that does not account for losses to ground combat, mechanical failures, or lack of fuel. The industrial numbers become even more staggering when you examine American production capacity. Republic Aviation produced 15,683 P-47 Thunderbolts in total. Production peaked in 1944 at nearly 300 aircraft per month from the Farmingdale factory alone. A second production line in Evansville, Indiana, added another 200 per month. 500 P-47 Thunderbolts per month. More than 16 aircraft per day rolling off American assembly lines, each one capable of carrying enough ordnance to destroy multiple tanks per mission. Each one reusable, refuelable, rearmed for multiple missions per day when needed. The arsenal of democracy was not just a slogan. It was a statement of mathematical certainty. Germany could not win a war of attrition against American industrial capacity. The P-47 Thunderbolt proved this in the skies over Normandy every single day. The Republic Aviation Factory in Farmingdale, Long Island, operated 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. 3 shifts of workers, mostly women, many of whom had never held a manufacturing job before the war. They came from department stores, from secretarial pools, from teaching positions, from homemaking. They came because their country needed them, and they built miracles. These were the real Rosie, the riveters. Each P-47 Thunderbolt required approximately 150,000 individual parts. Each part had to be manufactured to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. Each assembly had to be perfect because pilot lives depended on it. And somehow, impossibly, American workers achieved production rates that German intelligence officers refused to believe, even when presented with photographic evidence. When German spies reported that America was producing over 500 P-47s per month, Luftwaffe High Command dismissed the reports as Allied disinformation. It was simply not possible, they concluded, for any nation to build that many complex aircraft that quickly. But the photographs kept coming. Satellite reconnaissance images taken by high-altitude reconnaissance planes, showing row after row after row of completed P-47 Thunderbolts lined up at American airfields waiting for transport to Europe. Hermann Göring, Commander-in-Chief of the Luftwaffe, was shown these images in July 1944. His response was recorded by his aide and later entered into evidence at the Nuremberg trials. When we see such pictures, we know we have already lost the war. No nation can match such production. We are fighting the entire American industrial complex. This was the terrifying reality that Klaus Hartmann and his tank crews faced on June 14, 1944. They were not just fighting 4 aircraft. They were fighting the accumulated might of an entire nation mobilized for war. Every P-47 they saw represented thousands of American workers, millions of man-hours, billions of dollars of industrial capacity dedicated to one purpose: winning the war. And there were more P-47s coming. Always more. Every day, every week, every month. An unstoppable tide of American aircraft that German forces could not hope to match or counter. German tank commanders knew this. They had seen the numbers. They understood the mathematics of industrial warfare. And that knowledge was perhaps more demoralizing than the actual combat losses. But numbers alone do not tell the full story. The human element matters. The young men from Oklahoma and Indiana and Oregon and Massachusetts who climbed into those cockpits. The families who waited at home, checking the mailbox every day for letters. The small-town USA that sent its sons to save the world. Captain Robert Johnson, the flight leader on June 14, 1944, flew 91 combat missions during the war. He was shot down once, crash-landed twice, and returned home with the Distinguished Service Cross, the Silver Star, and the Distinguished Flying Cross with 7 oak leaf clusters. He survived the war and lived until 1998. He rarely talked about combat. When pressed by family members or historians, his answers were modest to the point of frustration. We did our job. That is what his generation said. That is how they processed what they had done. But in 1989, at a reunion of P-47 pilots, Johnson spoke more openly to fellow veterans who understood. A recording of that conversation exists, preserved by the P-47 Thunderbolt Pilots Association. You asked what it felt like, flying those missions. Honest answer, I was scared every single time, scared taking off, scared in combat, scared landing. But more than scared, I was angry. Angry at what those bastards had done to the world, angry at what they represented. So yeah, I pressed the attack. We all did, because somebody had to stop them, and it sure as hell was not going to stop itself. That is the voice of the greatest generation. Men who were scared but did it anyway. Men who downplayed their heroism. Men who came home and built the post-war world with the same determination they showed in combat. By the end of June 1944, German tank commanders in Normandy had learned brutal lessons. They learned to move only at night. They learned to hide their armor in buildings, under trees, anywhere with overhead cover. They learned that massing forces for a counterattack was suicide in daylight. They learned that the P-47 Thunderbolt had changed the rules of armored warfare forever. Klaus Hartmann survived the Normandy campaign. He made it back to Germany and fought in the desperate defense of the fatherland in 1945. He was captured by American forces in April 1945 and spent 2 years as a prisoner of war. During his interrogation, intelligence officers asked about his experiences in France. Hartmann answered honestly, in broken English. His words were transcribed and filed in his prisoner records. Your Thunderbolt was the worst. Worse than artillery. Worse than your tanks. We could fight artillery. We could fight tanks. But the Thunderbolt, there was nothing we could do. Nothing. We could only run and pray. The interrogation officer. Captain William Bradford from Chicago, Illinois, pressed for more details. What specifically made the P-47 so effective? Hartmann thought for a long moment before answering. His response fills 3 pages of the interrogation transcript and provides remarkable insight into the German perspective. It was not one thing. It was everything. The sound warned us they were coming, but gave us no time to prepare. The armor on those aircraft meant our anti-aircraft guns rarely brought them down. The firepower meant they could attack from beyond our effective response range. The ordnance meant every pass could destroy tanks. The numbers meant there were always more, always. And the pilots. Your pilots were aggressive, fearless. They dove through our flak like it did not exist. Our men called them the crazy Americans. You have to understand. We were trained that Panzer commanders do not retreat from aircraft. But after June, after seeing what your Thunderbolts could do, we retreated every time, every single time. This admission from a veteran German Panzer commander reveals the complete psychological dominance that American air power achieved by mid-1944. The German army, which had conquered most of Europe through aggressive combined arms tactics, had been reduced to hiding from American fighter bombers. The Blitzkrieg masters had become the ones running for cover. The impact of the June 14th mission extended far beyond the immediate tactical results. German intelligence analyzed the attack extensively. They calculated the time on target, the weapons expenditure, the damage inflicted, the casualties caused. Then they extrapolated those numbers across all of Normandy, across all of France, across all of Western Europe. The conclusions were devastating. A German staff officer, Major Heinrich Müller, wrote an analysis dated June 23, 1944, 9 days after Hartmann's encounter. The document was classified top secret and marked for distribution only to Army Group commanders and above. It was captured after the war and declassified in 1976. If American fighter bomber capabilities observed June 14th represent standard operational performance, continuation of armored operations in Western theater is mathematically unsustainable. Enemy aircraft can achieve local tactical air superiority at will. No German armored formation larger than company strength can maneuver in daylight without unacceptable losses. Recommendation: immediate negotiation of armistice on Western Front, before complete collapse of armored forces. That recommendation was rejected by Hitler personally. The war would continue for another 11 months. Hundreds of thousands more would die. But the mathematical reality identified by Major Müller remained true. Germany could not win against American air superiority backed by American industrial capacity. The men who flew those missions, like Captain Robert Johnson and his flight, never saw that German analysis. They never knew that their routine tactical strike mission had been studied at the highest levels of German military planning. They just kept flying, kept fighting, kept pressing the attack day after day until the war was won. That 17-minute mission on June 14, 1944, was not unique. It was representative of hundreds of similar missions flown every day across Europe in 1944 and 1945. Each mission flown by young men barely out of their teens. Each mission supported by factories full of workers building the weapons of freedom. Each mission bringing the world one step closer to liberation. Today, P-47 Thunderbolts are rare. Only a handful remain in flying condition. They appear at air shows where elderly veterans sometimes attend, remembering. The sound of that R-2800 engine is unmistakable, deep, powerful, menacing. The sound that once meant terror for the enemies of freedom. The sound that meant hope for the victims of tyranny. The sound that meant salvation for a world on the brink. The sound of 17 minutes that changed everything. Subscribe to this channel if preserving these stories matters to you. These veterans are leaving us. My own grandfather, a B-17 navigator, passed away 3 years ago. Before he died, he made me promise to keep telling these stories, to keep the memory alive. That is what this channel does. Every view, every like, every share helps ensure that a new generation remembers the price of freedom. If you want to support this work directly, YouTube's Super Thanks feature helps fund the research that goes into these videos, original documents, veteran interviews, archive access fees. It all costs money, but it all matters. Because once these stories are forgotten, they are gone forever. Next week, we are covering the P-38 Lightning's role in the Pacific Theater. Subscribe and hit the bell so you do not miss it. The story of how American twin-engine fighters dominated the skies over the Pacific is just as remarkable as what happened in Europe. Different theater, same American ingenuity, same determination to win. Thanks for watching. Share this story with everyone who needs to truly understand what the greatest generation did for all of us. The immense sacrifices they made, the astonishing achievements they secured, and why. We must never forget their legacy. Your freedom soars on the very wings they built. Your safety firmly rests on the bedrock foundation they laid. The world as you know it exists because they courageously stood up when it mattered most. Never forget, never take it for granted, and always, always honor those who selflessly served, giving everything. God bless America, and God bless the veterans who bravely saved the world.